Welcome to a new episode of Open World Chat. I am your host, Jim Dandino, joined by, as always, John Odom. Say hi.
As always, hi.
And we are joined this week by a very illustrious guest, the proprietor of the somewhat reputable comics journalism and opinion site, Shelfdust, Steve Morris. Steve, welcome to the show. As a patron of Shelfdust, I am thrilled to have you here to talk about your wonderful work.
Yes, you are. Thank you for having me on as well.
And we're here today to talk about Shelfdust's new countdown of the top 50 comic events of all time. How did you think of this? Who were you arguing with when you came up with the idea for this piece?
I was brought into someone else's argument. So two people were having an argument, they're having a lovely time doing it on Twitter, and then they started DMing me and said, Steve, look, make this a real thing. It was El Sandifer, the critic who writes a lot of things about Doctor Who in particular, and it was Kieran Gillen, the comics writer, were having a fight about comic book events, mainly what events actually are events and which are the best ones, which people actually like and think have lasted. So they wrote to me and said, Steve, make it a thing, as they sometimes do. And so I went off. I found 150 comic book critics, and I said to them, please, can you give me a list of your favorite events? I'll put them into a big master countdown, and then we'll publish it and pretend it's legitimate. And here we are. December's come and gone. We've published our top 50 countdown, and the internet has not been the same since.
No, crack the internet in half. Wait, was House of M on there? Oh, yeah, it's number 24. That makes sense.
All right, I got a question for you to inform the discussion, though. And I'm looking at your list. A lot of great stuff on that list, but I'm struck by what really is the definition of an event here? Because some of them are probably obvious. The Clone Saga, all right, across 1 million Spider-Man books, big event. Original Clone Saga, way back when, just a story arc, or was it an event too? I mean, I see things like Kree-Skrull War is the one that really drew my attention. Is that what makes that an event versus just a long plot line?
It's a good question, and it's one thing that made this a really hard list to put together. So for an event to be an event, I think there's a few things it needs to be, and there's one or two things we'd like it to be. I think an event needs to have some kind of impact at the time. It needs to have some kind of big sell, which is why you're reading it. And then that needs to impact across not just the main story, but perhaps any other stories that are in its orbit. So if you're talking about Marvel or DC, it's a storyline that hits any other character who's in the vicinity of wherever the main story is happening. If we're talking about something like 2000 AD, it's a story where every character within the franchise has to interact with the chaos in some way. Another important part of this is if I say it is, in which case it is. A lot of events are, it's hard to say if some things are events or not. And I think what I did was I had a few people help me on this, and I would refer back to them, but would basically say, does it have an eventy feel to it? Is it eventy in a way? Has it got that X factor, that thing that makes it feel like it deserves to be a big event rather than just a major storyline of some kind? And we tried to keep it sort of in a way that makes sense, but I argue actually getting it slightly wrong is what makes the list more entertaining.
So there's so much that I want to move towards, based off of what you just said. But my editor at Den of Geek will murder me if I don't raise Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen 133, which we got, the top 50 were published and are available for you to peruse right now on Shelfdust's website. But we were granted access to the top 100. And Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, issue number 133, is number 77 on the list. And so why did something like that get on, but not Watchmen?
Jim's now stretching back like my arms are, and my job is done here. So with Jimmy Olsen 133, that was the first Jack Kirby story at DC, and it promoted as being Kirby is coming, Kirby's here. So there's a few people in the comics critics in the world that think Jack Kirby's quite good at comics, and I found that if I tried to tell them no, they would get really mad at me, and so I folded. With something like that, I think there is an argument that the story itself, not an event. The arrival of Jack Kirby to DC, that could be called an event, I think. So it was kind of like an outside forces event rather than inside the issue event. But yeah, it's absolutely one of those ones which is completely arbitrary and frustrating. And that's what I encourage in the list. I think being annoying is a key part of writing a good list.
I think that's completely fair. And I like the point about Kirby's arrival being the event and not necessarily what happens in the issue. And now to go back to the had an impact at the time, I think when we were emailing about doing this episode, I got frustrated with myself for not remembering the New Valiant crossovers from the early teens. And I think now in retrospect, the fact that I forgot them is a pretty compelling argument for why nobody voted for him.
And I think the same argument can go into why Watchmen's not in the list, because nobody voted for it. Yeah. It wasn't that I said you can't vote for it. It doesn't count. It's not a thing. You've got the Multiversity in the list, which is arguably just Watchmen Part 2 alternate universe. So it's just simply no one thought it was one or voted for it and didn't think about it. And I think that probably matches that whole eventy feeling. People just didn't think, oh, events, what's an event? Watchmen's an event. Nobody thought that. So it didn't make the list, which I think is another interesting sort of way of surveying the general landscape of comics critics right now.
Do you guys conflate event and crossover in your heads? More personal thing and less, the rules of the countdown. I think I do a little bit. John?
Oh, yes. I didn't know you're asking me. I'm not very interesting. Why do you want to know what I have to think?
I don't know. Why would anyone want to know what you think on the podcast that we host, John?
Well, I think that goes to, my first thought was, it'd have to be some kind of crossover, some kind of thing. But then looking at that list, it had plenty of things that weren't. And I guess this is the problem with a list like that. It's like Steve was saying, it's going to become something, a list of what you think of and what's a big deal and what's your favorite. Like, where is the coming of Galactus, for example, on the list? That would be, by the standards of at least half of what's on that list, probably that'd be an event, and it's a doozy. But it's not there. So, the terms become mushy and it becomes one of those, I don't know. I appreciate, Steve, that you're having a little bit of a hard time specifically specifying there what it is we're talking about there. I'm sorry, my vocabulary left me there. It's going to be a day of redundancies.
I think with a difference between a crossover and an event, I think as well. If you're talking about a crossover, you're including the whole thing in one go. And I think if you were to say, what's your favorite crossover? If you said something like, I don't know, Secret Wars or something, you're inherently saying that every single book that it crossed into, every tie-in, every spin-off, that's part of what you're saying is good. And a lot of the time, I think the main event is either good or bad, and stuff around it is either good or bad. It's not often that everything is good. Secret Invasion is a really good example of that, the Marvel story, where you've got the main storyline, 7 or 8 issues, Brian Michael Bendis and Len Yu. But outside of that, you've then got random stories with Skrulls popping up anywhere, attacking any other character. And you think, well, if I think Secret Invasion itself is a good event, do I think it's a good crossover? Because if I think it's a good crossover, I have to say that X-Men miniseries where Beast commits genocide, that's good as well. And no one thinks that. That's one of Mike Carey's rare missteps. And I think it's weird. We, as comic people, we've set up these weird rules for ourselves. What's a graphic novel? What's a trade paperback? What counts as different things? And I think crossover is one of those things where it's so specific while being completely meaningless, and I think it's quite fun. that it is both at the same time.
Mhm.
Well, this
So-
list is a kind of an exercise in maybe chilling out about all that stuff too, because we're all obsessed with what's this, what's that, where's the definition of that? It spreads into everything. What's canon, what isn't? Just throw it out there. What do people like?
Steve, Steve asked for critics and comic writer people to vote for their top 10.
Yeah,
and
what do they know?
I promptly sent him 12. So we're also notorious rule followers. We make these rules for ourselves.
Have much different ideas than others as well. Some people were really specific about what they wanted. Some people said, I only think 4 events are good. I'll only give you a list of 4. Some people did send me more than 10, which is a counting issue. But I mean, we're interested in words, aren't we? Not numbers. So I suppose it's fine. And some people, like I say, focused on events that were publishing events rather than narrative events. So it's not, they weren't picking the events that they thought this was a really good story. They thought this was something that did a big thing for the publishing line at the time. That I think there's arguments that a lot of the comics in the list, a lot of them aren't that really good, to be honest. I think, I don't want to get in trouble, a lot of people think Crisis on Infinite Earths was important more than it was good, for example.
Right.
But people voted it for its notoriety rather than for its actual content, I think. Perhaps.
So I want to fight. So let's frame the discussion a little bit. The top 10, and I strongly encourage everybody to go to shelfdust.com and read the entries for all 50 because they're very good. But the top 10 are: number 10 was Death of Superman. Number 9 was Morris and Seven Soldiers of Victory. Number 8, Age of Apocalypse. Number 7, DC 1 Million. Number 6, the original Infinity Gauntlet. Number 5, the original Inferno. Number 4, House and Powers of X. Number 3 was Crisis on Infinite Earths. 2 was Final Crisis, and 1 was the Hickman Assad Rabiq Secret Wars from 2015. A entirely unobjectionable list. I cannot actually argue with the placement of any of those. I'm pretty sure 7 of them were on my ballot. 8, I think. No, actually, I think only 7. I don't think I had Seven Soldiers, 1 Million, or Infinity Gauntlet or Original Inferno on mine. On Crisis on Infinite Earths, there is the craft that George Perez put in is very, very good. The story is absolute action figure mashing together nonsense, which I think has DC's backwards looking obsession with that story has handicapped it in future events. I think it's telling that Infinite Crisis is nowhere to be found. Infinite Crisis was 25, right? But I think it was good in several ways. It was just not a high quality narrative experience. Right.
Just for the record, I disagree with that for a lot of reasons.
Fight.
Yeah, you two fight each other. Go.
Argue with me.
No, I don't want to argue. I'm a peaceful guy. I will say though, I think it is really. I will agree that it's a very a very defendable top 10 list. And yeah, a couple of those I thought, well, that's interesting that it's up there. Something like A Million or Original Inferno. It's like, oh yeah, those are good. Top 10? I don't know, but there they are. So perfectly good list.
I disagree. I think the list is a bit stupid, to be honest. I think the top 10's wrong.
Oh, what's your top 10? Oh my God.
Yeah, what was
behind
yours?
the curtain here? What's your top 10?
I didn't get to do a top 10. I kept myself out of the voting in order to be, the observer, the watcher. I was a while too. I was forbidden from interfering in the list itself. I just watched it and then silently judged it without getting to say anything about it. But there's a lot of stuff in the list that I think is wrong, to be honest. And again, that's kind of the fun of it, I suppose. When you read the actual countdown on Shelfdust and how I've written it, I don't hide away from the stuff that I think shouldn't be on there. And I do think that there's a lot of stuff in there that speaks more to the comics community than it does to the actual quality of the stories in it. For example, anything Grant Morrison does gets a automatic boost from what it perhaps should get. So I wouldn't think DC 1 Million, Seven Soldiers of Victory, that sort of thing. I think, well, you can maybe just get into the list, but to be in the top 10, that is comic critics being indulgent, I think. Stuff like Hoxpox.
They were odd.
Yeah. Hoxpox being in there, I think that's, you could argue that's recency bias. It's just the newest big event, perhaps. And further down the list, X of Swords got in there somehow, which I'm not a fan of whatsoever. Again,
really?
Give it a few years, that won't be in there, I think.
I really like, so I actually like I really like Hoxpox for what it did, but there is a part of me that questions its utility as a complete story. It feels, with the initial flush of excitement of it being gone, it feels more like a very interesting prologue than it does a story, because there isn't really a beginning, middle, and end. It's really just a lot of beginning, right? Am I
Because
way
everything
off
has
on
to
this?
lead into what's going to happen when the line changes afterwards. It's all
Right.
setting up for that.
Right. Also, I think that it hasn't been tarnished, but what Gillen's been doing in the X-Men line and with Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals is better craft, I think, from a storytelling perspective. That definitely has a beginning, middle, and end. And I will dive deep on this someday, but it's really interesting the way that he constructed a major summer crossover as an opportunity for a bunch of single character focus issues, and major, like working in major character beats for folks who have never gotten them before, like Sebastian Shaw or Exodus or Cersei. Like, this is a defining Cersei story, right? It's really good. That said, what if you could have put your finger on the scales, what would you have moved? What would you have moved into the top 50 that got votes? What did you see come in? And when it came in, you said, oh shit, I hope that one wins.
For me, it was the 2000 AD mega epics that showed up. So for me, I've spent the last year getting into 2000 AD properly for the first time, really. And the Apocalypse War is incredible. That is the eventiest event that anyone's ever made, I feel. John Wagner, completely underrated, even though he's one of the most prolific and admired writers in the industry. And I think that not getting as high as it did is basically just because people don't read 2000 AD as much as they read the Marvel stuff, the DC stuff. It's just more in the public eye. But I would have loved to see the Apocalypse War be higher up, personally. I like to have seen people trying to take more of a punt on a few things. So there was an opening for something like BPRD to get in there with its Hell on Earth cycle, or the Frog stories or something like that, because you could argue right at the end of BPRD that does become an event with everything that happens there. And I think it's a little bit of a shame whenever you see something that's not Marvel DC get into a list like this. You kind of go, yes, it's an underdog, it's doing well. Unity, the Valiant crossover from 1993, that got into the list, and you think, brilliant, someone's reading something slightly different. And it would be nice to see more of that happening, I think. There's events I'd not even read that were doing quite well, like Dark Cybertron was doing quite well for a little while. I know Power Rangers Shattered Grid is quite popular. I've not read that. Things like that, seeing that show up would have been nice to see that get into the top 50, and just break up the the two big publishers, I suppose, in American comics, and put something else in there that no one expected.
I mean, looking at the list, what killed me right away was how close the Children's Crusade came. It is 1 point outside of the top 50. That is the crossover between Hellblazer and Sandman, the Family Man stuff. And I came to Hellblazer late. I only started reading it a couple of years ago on the DC app, and the Family Man stuff in Hellblazer is the creepiest shit I've ever read in a comic. And it didn't even occur to me that it was a crossover. Otherwise, I would have voted for it.
And again, it's just fallen out of memory a little bit, I suppose, because Vertigo's gone away, and all those characters have gone off to do different things or just vanished into limbo. And it's just like, well, it's not remained in the public consciousness, I suppose, like you might have wanted it to.
Yeah.
But again, it's another really left field choice. When people started voting for the Children's Crusade, I thought, oh, is that the Scarlet Witch story? to start with. I had to get people to clarify. No, it's the other one. But yeah, that was really close to getting in there. And in fairness, BPRD was only a few points out there as well. And Shattered Grid is a few points behind that as well. There's a lot of comics that were just slightly out. And I think if you then go into the top 50, right at the end of the top 50, 50 to 40, they're mostly X-Men comics. And it's just because I think the critical weight at the moment, and there's a pun there somewhere, is X-Men readers. So the X-Men comics get in there, even if they don't all really deserve to be in there, perhaps. I mean, are we really thinking Avengers versus X-Men is great?
No one thinks that. I can't find a single person who thinks it. That might
for some
be
reason we did.
I know.
I don't know where they came from.
Also, Dark's Arbitron, I ride or die for that story. I can't believe that a story about weird giant robots made me think so much about gender. But that era of Transformers comics was really, really interesting in a very strange way. And I did enjoy seeing that get votes. What infuriated you the most about the list? Besides Morrison getting like 30 free points on everything?
It's tricky that. There were a lot of people who submitted things that I think clearly weren't events. Mm-hmm. And I had to ask them to say, look, I really appreciate you think this is great. However, this is a list of top events, please. And you can't just pick whatever random thing comes into your brain. Like people were picking arcs of Love and Rockets. And you think, well, great comics. I'm absolutely sure these are all great, but like Maggie the Mechanic's not an event. It's just a story. It's a series of different stories compiled together into one thing. There were a lot of people picking just random issues that just come out the last week. A lot of people tried to pick Judgment Day, Avengers X-Men Eternals, but it was, I think, 2 issues in at the time we had to vote. And you think, no, it's got to finish. It's not even finished. Like, you don't know what the ending is. People were voting for that as well. And then, there's a lot of stuff that got voted for that I never heard of. I'm going now. You've got the top 100 list. I've got the top 231 list. Spider-Man the Other was in there. You've got Godzilla versus Charles Barkley is in there. What else have we got? Sonic the Hedgehog crossing over with Mega Man.
Technically, maybe an event.
Maybe. Image X Month, which I can't remember what that was. That was a weird thing. A Simpsons crossover called When Bongos Collide. It was. There were a lot of choices. And Onslaught, interestingly, but I suppose that does count.
That's just trolling.
But we are in the top 200 at that point. Well, I'll tell you, if you want to be terrified by the thought process of our contemporaries, Ultimatum.
Who dares?
Strong.
I need
votes.
We're not going to say it on here, but I need names. I need you to forward me the names of the people who put Ultimatum on there. Okay. For the folks who don't know, and why would you? Because it's terrible and you should absolutely not know. Ultimatum was the crossover where Magneto killed a whole bunch of people in the Ultimate Universe, and the Blob. The Blob ate Wasp.
Yeah.
And I think that was the first time that Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch did the dirty dirt.
Complete with the taste like chicken joke, as I recall.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And they got Ultimate Doctor Strange and wrapped him up into a big cigar and then pulled it with it tight till his head exploded.
Yep.
That was delightful. 4 people voted for that. 4 people voted for it. It
was
came
one
in
of them, was one of them
place.
Was one of them Gavin Jasper? Because he did on Fourth Letter. Do you remember this? He re-lettered it so that it was actually good and it was funny. I think it's called Ultimatum Week. Oh, this is old internet, man.
Yeah, this is from the days when people used to read comic book websites. I can't reveal who voted for it because of GDPR rules.
Okay. You can listen if those names happen to fall off a truck and land on a boat and float their way over to the States. I'm okay with it. I'll take it. But these people need to be punished.
It's an incredibly random set of circumstances. I can't imagine that happening. But if it does, sure.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh my God. The Finch art was so bad. I'm looking at the I'm looking at the Ultimate Edit Week now. I can't believe people would vote for this. Oh,
4 people.
this
Your
is throwing me.
peers.
This
Your
is throwing me
peers.
off for the entire day. I know. I my level of respect for my colleagues is in the toilet now.
Oh, that's where it belongs, to be honest.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm
we
curious,
can't trust any of these people.
did both Jim and I, when this came up, went to this same sort of peculiar place in our heads, and it definitely potentially expands the definition of event once again. So we both thought of Assistant Editors Month.
Mhm.
Did
Which
anybody put
I
that
think
out
it
there
got
as
votes.
an event? Did it?
I believe it got votes. I'm scrolling through my list to try and find it.
If you
I'm
counted
sure
all
it
12,
did.
if you counted all 12 of mine, then it got at least one vote because it was
But
my
I'll tell you,
alternate.
one thing similar to that which did get in was Nuff Said month. If you remember the month where every Marvel comic was wordless, quote unquote, with no dialogue in any of them, except the ones that cheated.
I like it. Well, yeah, right. New X-Men had the sentence at the end. I like it. I'm into it.
Yeah, that got a few votes. I can't see Assistant Editors Month in here, actually. I don't think it got voted for. I think people just didn't think to vote for it.
I did. It was number 12, I think.
But again, that is, as we spoke
I
again,
guess
maths. That's a math.
my top 10 for our listeners. My top 10 were Secret Wars, the Hickman Secret Wars, Final Crisis, Age of Apocalypse, Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Thanos Imperative, the culmination of the Abnett and Lanning Marvel space saga. I had Death of Superman and Nightfall as a tie because functionally they're the same event, even if they are distinct in craft and content. X-Men Second Coming was number 7. Suicide Squad, the Janus Directive, the crossover from the Ostrander, Yale, McDonough Suicide Squad era with all of the DC clandestine teams. Then I had No Man's Land, the Batman era where Gotham City was sealed off by a earthquake and the federal government said, tough, we're not fixing it. And my last one was Wildcats Aliens, which I don't think made it on. I think it ended up dropping off when we counted Death of Superman and Nightfall as separate ones. But Wildcats Aliens is the gateway to the modern era of comics, the widescreen era of comics. So I think it's still important.
Important or good?
I think it's good too. I think I always like watching the Aliens wreck shop on, especially people that folks actually love. And it was very interesting to me to see that have a lasting impact because the stuff that happened in there were plot points in early Authority stories.
I don't have top 10. I things, trying to think about things like that confuses me, but I will put in good words for Annihilation, which I adored, which would be in any top 10 for me. And and Grimjack Trade Wars, which is a very complex multi-issue event within Grimjack. I guess I don't know that you never know if there's crossover in Grimjack because of Munden's bar in the back, but that really locked in that whole series is to me is one of the best series of the last several decades. But other than that, it's all good. I like it all, but it does make me, the how much of this is going to be generational too. I mean, I hate to nitpick here I go again, nitpicking the idea of a top 100, even though we all love things like top 100s, breaks down if you think about it too much, and I should shut up and just go with it. But still, I'm thinking to where Jim and I did not fight about Crisis, the original Crisis. He's like, it's not well written. It's more of a mashup, like a Contest of Champions or something like that. When it came out, I was picking up every issue and I was glued to it as story. I was like, what's going on? What's happening next? Who are we going to see? Where is this going to go? Who is this person? What do they dare do and not do? But that was also before these kinds of things were routine. So certainly reading it now, the quality, everything now. So from my experience as an old person, my experience of that entire series is going to be different. So that seems that's going to get in the way too, as far as finding common ground.
I think that's the nice thing about the way that Steve did it is that by casting a wide net, you account better for differences of taste
You have
and
to.
differences of timing.
Otherwise, it gets pedantic. You just have to.
Pedantic comic book fans? My word. My
Yes, well done,
monicles.
Steve. Wide net. That was necessary.
I mean, the critics as well, they came from different age groups, like you say, different backgrounds in reading comics, different areas of the world. So it's not just a list of Americans. Obviously, I'm English. A lot of people from the UK, but people from Europe as well. There's some people in Japan. So there are people voting from different areas of the world as well, different perspectives, different access to comics, because that's an important part of it. You know, if you're in Ireland, for example, you're not getting all the same comics that the people in America are getting. So you can't vote for a lot of them because you never even got to see them. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm going to get told if I'm wrong, I think in Ireland, Uncanny X-Men stopped getting published around about the time of Gambit showing up and meeting up with Rogue. So after that, there's like a big dead period for a whole country, you know. So there's a lot of aspects like that, I think, that do come into it. And there's also people being political, which is part of it. So people know they've got 10 votes and they know their first place vote is going to get more points than their last place vote. So if you're going to vote, you're going to try and get your weird choices in at the top and then put the things, everyone's going to vote for right at the bottom, you know, because everyone's going to vote for an ill-made list anyway. I think that accounts for seeing some of the stranger things that have a passionate fan base, like let's say the Invincible War, one issue of Invincible, that's halfway through the list. I mean, that's because a few people were really passionate about it and put it right at the top of their list and played politically, which is a smart way of doing it. So it does change how the list looks, which is, again, part of the fun.
Gaming an election. I'm shocked.
Who would do such a thing? Steve,
You're both American.
We're both working politics in America too. We would never do anything of the sort. Thank you for joining us today. Where can people find you on the internet?
I can be found on social media at Steve W. Morris in most places. I am trying to avoid the obvious site at the moment. You can also find Shelfdust at shelfdust.com or at Shelfdust site on several different platforms as well. And that's two places you'll mostly find me.
And make sure that you go to Patreon and support Shelfdust on there. It is a good and worthwhile endeavor.
That's a good point. I should remember to tell people that. Yeah, patreon.com/selfdust or kofi.com/selfdust if you feel like doing that as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Good talk, everybody.